the Christic event and event. As a result, then, of life's very recent passing through a new critical point in the course of its development, no older religious form or formulation can any longer, either factually or logically, satisfy to the full our need and capacity for worship. Satisfy, I mean, what has now become permanently their specifically human quality. So true is this, that a religion of the future, definable as a religion of evolution, cannot fail to appear before long. A new mysticism, the germ of which, as happens when anything is born, must be recognizable somewhere in our environment, here and now. The more we consider this psychobiological situation, the more clearly we can distinguish the universal meaning and importance of what may legitimately be called the Christic advent. The Gospel tells us that Christ once asked his disciples, "Quid dicat est filium hominis?" to which Peter impetuously answered, "Tu es Christus filius Dei vivi," which was both an answer and no answer, since it still left the question of knowing what exactly is the true living God. Consider then, from the earliest days of the Church, has not the whole history of Christian thought been one long, slow, and persistent exploration of Peter's testimony to the man Jesus? An extraordinary and absolutely unique phenomenon. As the centuries go by, all the great figures of prophets invariably become blurred or are mythologized in human consciousness. Christ, on the other hand, and Christ alone, as time passes, becomes a more and more real being for a particularly vigorous section of mankind. And this as a result of a twofold process which paradoxically continually both personalizes and universalizes him more fully as the years go by. For millions and millions of believers, representing the most consciously aware of human beings, Christ has never ceased since his first coming to re-emerge from every crisis of history with more immediacy, more urgency, and greater penetrative power than ever before. If then he is to be able to offer himself once again to our new world as the new God for whom we are looking, what does he still lack? Two things to my mind, and two only. The first is this, that in a universe in which we can no longer seriously entertain the idea that thought is an exclusively terrestrial phenomenon, Christ must no longer be constitutionally restricted in his operation to a mere redemption of our planet. And the second is that in a universe in which we can now see that everything is co-reflective along a single axis, Christ must no longer be offered to our worship in consequence of a subtle and pernicious confusion between supernatural and extranatural as a peak distinct from and a rival to that to which the biologically continued slope of an anthropogenesis is leading us. In the eyes of everyone who is alive to the reality of the cosmic movement of complexity consciousness which produces us, Christ, as still presented to the world by classical theology, is both too confined, localized, astronomically and evolutively too intrinsic to be able to cephalize the universe as we now see it. And further, there is undoubtedly a most revealing correspondence between the shape, the pattern of the two confronting omegas, that postulated by modern science and that experienced by Christian mysticism. A correspondence, and one might even say a parity, for Christ would not still be the consummator so passionately described by St. Paul if he did not take on precisely the attributes of the astonishing cosmic pole already potentially, if not as yet explicitly, demanded by our new knowledge of the world, the pole at whose peak the progress of evolution must finally converge. Prediction and extrapolation, as it is true, are always dangerous. Nevertheless, it is surely impossible in the present circumstances not to believe that Christ's gradual rise in human consciousness cannot continue much longer without there being produced in our spiritual climate the revolutionary events of his coincidence with the definitely foreseeable center of a terrestrial co-reflection, and more generally of the assumed focus of all reflection in the universe, forced together ever more closely to the progress of homogenization and drawn together even more by a fundamental identity, the two omegas. Let me emphasize again, the omegas of experience and of faith are undoubtedly on the point of reacting upon one another in human consciousness, and finally of being synthesized. The cosmic being about fantastically to magnify the Christic, and the Christic, astonishing though it may seem, to amorize, which means to energize to the maximum the entire cosmic. It is, in truth, an inevitable, explosive meeting, and its probable effect will soon be to weld together science and mysticism in a great tide of released evolutive power, centered around a Christ at last, 2,000 years after Peter's confession, identified by the work of centuries as the ultimate summit, that is, the only possible God of an evolution, definitely recognized as a movement of convergence. And this is what I foresee, and this is what I am waiting for. And this is a book written by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, Christianity and Evolution. I would read it if I were you.